Right, so we are back for another session. Let me share my screen. Okay, want to talk about metrics and how to measure, and I got to admit that I changed up this presentation a bit in relation to everything we're experiencing right now to make it more relevant to how we can start to measure the impact of what we're doing in this current crisis that we're experiencing. So let's see, you've already seen our beautiful team. So let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. First, what's your role in all of this? You may be thinking, you know, I am lowest man on the totem pole or whatever the case may be, and I don't really get to measure anything. Wrong. You get to measure. Measurements are not just for finances. They are for taking action, and you can definitely take action in any role, and then to develop some accountability. So what's your role in all of this? I got to tell you, I'm going to brag on my team a little bit. My team doesn't just meet goals. My team crushes goals. And we're not inherently more successful than anybody else, than you or anyone else. But we have a culture here where everyone understands and owns their role in the overall success of our business and the overall crushing of our goals. So y'all know I love me some quotes. We've already seen that before. So slide this over. So I want to read a few of these that I especially love. The first one is my absolute favorite. It is my mantra for life. What gets measured gets managed. So if you can't see it, then it's out of sight, out of mind, and you don't worry about it. The next one is from Vince Lombardi. My dad will be happy about this one. The measure of who we are is what we do with what we have. And so just like so many of the panelists and Thomas was talking before, we lead from where we are. And part of that leadership is measuring our progress to our success. So we do what we can with what we have. And then Michael Jordan, talent wins games, but teamwork and intelligence wins championships. And so we're kind of talking about battles and wars here. So we've been battling things. We've been battling racism. We've been battling this whole inequality in so many areas of our country and in our lives. And that's the championship, right? The little games that we're having to win are these moments in history where we get a chance to stand up and say something. And as we've noted before, every time we stand up and say something, something changes. And it may only change for a little while, and that's unfortunate. But if we work together as a team, we start to measure our impact and know what we can do, what levers we can pull that's going to have the greatest influence, then we can work together and win the championship. So again, measurement and metrics are not just for finances. I'm an accountant. I love finances. I love what kind of story they can tell, but it doesn't live in a vacuum. It doesn't live in a bubble. There are so many other things that flavor and enrich that story that we also need to measure. So we've already talked about efficiency, but let's define it a little bit. Efficiency is the maximization of resources to achieve a result. So as few inputs as you can put in for the maximum output. Impact. So we need to evaluate the results or the effectiveness of our efforts. And then sustainability. And this is where the rubber meets the road. How can we join the impact measures with the efficiency measures to really tell a story about sustainability? So this is just an example. I know you guys have seen this before. I'm not going to dig too deep into it, But these are examples of metrics, and yes, they're financial, but I wanted to kind of take a second and talk about how we come up with these, because, you know, metrics aren't just financial, but the financial ones are often the least understood by young professionals. So I want to make sure that that you do understand these. And metrics in general are measured at a point in time. And the real value of them is when you keep measuring. If you keep measuring, then you start to see a trend. Are we making any change? Is what we're doing having an impact on the trends? So, so how do we actually take action? And we've said it before, but it's worth repeating. Knowing something is only half the battle. It's what you do with that knowledge that makes the difference and creates the value. So the first step in taking action on metrics is identifying the lead measures. And, you know, about a year ago, I was able and fortunate to make a presentation to YNPN Phx on taking action from information. And we talked a lot about lead measures. But a lead measure is the lever. So if you think of a big rock, how are you going to move a big rock? Well, you need leverage. And so you put in a fulcrum or whatever, a big old stick, and you push down on the end of it, and that gives you leverage. It increases the power of the effort you're placing to move something you couldn't have moved on your own. And so that's what we're talking about. When you talk about lead measures, you want to identify the thing that is influencing the metric. So let's talk about our slide before. Sorry, I'm using two screens and I get lost, my mouse gets lost sometimes. So let's look at days cash on hand. And this is also the same case for Luna. So what are the measures? What are the activities that are affecting this measure? Well, the first thing you've got to know is what goes into it. So what we're talking about is cash and average expenses. Cash is your numerator, average expenses is your denominator. And so what are some things in your role that you can do to affect how much cash the organization has or affect the amount of expenses that you see? So this is an efficiency measure. It's also the working capital measure. What are some things in your role that you can do? So let me know in the comments. What are some things that you can do inside your organization to impact either the amount of cash that you have or the amount of expense that you have? Sorry, I'm looking for my chat box now. Anyone? Anyone have an idea of what you can do in your role to affect expenses? Let's just take that, expenses. Jesse, you're right. You're the fundraiser, so you're bringing in the money. You're definitely affecting cash. And one of the measurements that you might be looking at is how much of that cash is recurring, how much of that cash is pledged for a future time period. Berkeley, operational offset with in-kind donations. That's a great way. So you get the same benefit of the same amount of resources, but you're just getting them in a different way. So you're offsetting your expense. Having people work from home longer. You know, this is an interesting one because I have seen several organizations now who really balked at this whole remote work thing and realize how much money it's saving them. They don't have the rent, maybe, if you could get out of the lease. You don't have rent, you don't have janitorial costs, you don't have a huge copier in the corner. How many people hate those kinds of contracts? You don't have necessarily the office supplies expense that you had before. So some of that expense is being shifted onto your employees, and there are ways that you can underwrite that, but it's still a much lower cost burden than you had in your previous space. Making my role more efficient, and that's what we're talking about. How can you increase efficiency in your work so you can either get more done or you can get the same amount done with less resources? You guys are doing great. So now that you've kind of identified some ways that you can affect cash or expenses, what are the lead measures? What are the things that you can pull the lever on to make that move? One of the things that was mentioned was the in-kind donations. So if you feel like in-kind donations is where you can be most impactful, then that's where you measure. And so one of the measures you may have for in-kind donations is how many asks does it take me to get something I'm asking for? How often do we get things we actually can use versus things that people think we want and they're just kind of dumping on us? So I know that happens to you sometimes. So that's great. So you can push on that lever to make a difference in that measure. So now we're going to so that's the action, right? Taking the action to influence the measure. So making the ask, changing the way that you're communicating, maybe sending out a list of things that you really need for in-kind donations so that people can focus their efforts on those. And now you've taken action. So what do we need to do? We need to measure again. We need to measure to see if the action that we took actually gave us the results that we were looking for. And each of these can be in levels, right? So if you're the one looking for in-kind donations and you're measuring the effectiveness of that, right? So that's your measure. And then someone in the CFO chair may be looking at expenses. Are my expenses going up or down? And so you can see the impact of what you're doing, not only on your role, but on the organization as a whole. So next we want to talk about accountability. And this is probably the most important part of all of this. You can measure, but if no one knows you're measuring, are you really measuring? You are really measuring, but you don't have any skin in the game at this point. And I want to show you, my team, like I said, are goal crushers. And right now we have a scoreboard. Each of us have our own individual ones. We are doing a health challenge, and each of us have things to do and goals to track on this health challenge. This is our new one, so that's why it's not filled out. So here's one from the other week. You can see, hopefully, that we are tracking progress. The other thing that we do for accountability, this is kind of keeping us accountable to ourselves, but we are also accountable to our team. And every week during our team meeting, we have a scoreboard review of whatever our goal is for this quarter. And for this quarter, it is wellness. And so each one of us goes through and lets the team know how they're doing. What are they doing to meet the goals? What is their progress, whether they've made progress or not. So accountability is really important. And I encourage you to get creative with your scoreboards. You want a scoreboard. I'm a digital person, but I have a physical scoreboard. And so it's really great. I know we're working from home, so maybe you have something on your intranet or some other thing, but it would be really great if you designed and built a physical scoreboard. Go back to your days in middle school when you had the poster board and your markers or your construction paper cutouts or whatever, and build yourself a really fun scoreboard. Making it fun gives you more buy-in to what you're doing. So let's pull this all together and talk about sustainability. So when you're measuring these things, sometimes you can get a little siloed and you don't really understand the overall impact or story that these are telling for the organization. So this is an example of how you can tell a story about sustainability. This is a matrix. On the left-hand side, we have, on the vertical axis, we have impact measures. And so impact measures may be things like how many families are no longer hungry because we were able to give meals, or how many families are no longer getting evicted. I'm thinking about, say, St. Joseph the Worker. How many families are no longer getting evicted because dad has meaningful employment because of the programs that the St. Joseph the Worker has. So that's your impact measure. On the horizontal axis is your efficiency measure. And so these can be anything from, and we talked about a few financial efficiency measures, but we also talked about some non-financial measures that are more like conversion rates, for instance. That's a great efficiency measure for this. So in the upper left-hand corner, once you measure, and whatever effort you're talking about, could be a program, it could be a fundraiser, it could be your very own wellness challenge, or whatever it is that you're working on in life or at work, this is valid. So in the upper left-hand corner, we have efforts that are high impact, but low efficiency. And so you're getting really great results, but man, does it take a lot of effort. And is that really sustainable? And sustainability for this effort relies on the supplementation of other efforts that you have going on. So you may have to pull resources from other efforts in order to keep this thing going. You may have to ask for help. You may have to pull money from something else. Whatever the resource it is that you're using is going to supplement this. Now, this is not a terrible place to be. It's just a hard place to be. And sometimes, if we're talking programmatically about your organizations, a lot of times these are the heart and soul of your mission. Like, this is why you exist. And it's hard, but it's worth it because it's impactful. We just got to find other ways to make it sustainable. Now, the opposite of that, on the lower left-hand corner, is low impact and low efficiency. So these are the things that you tried really, really hard. You thought they were going to work, but honestly, you don't have the knowledge, or you don't have the experience, or the access to resources. And so what you're doing, you're trying really hard, but it's just not having any impact at all. Like, whatever effort you're trying, it's not working. So you have a decision to make right now. You have a decision to either identify those lead measures to determine, is there anything that we can do to make this better, or just stop doing it. Let someone else who is experts in that space do that. In the upper right-hand corner, this is like the star of all. These are your high efficiency, high impact efforts. Like, we're super good at this, and man, does it make a difference. That is sustainable. That is like the epitome. That is your goal for everything. Not everything's going to make it there, but that's the goal for everything. And it's super sustainable. So sustainable, in fact, that it may supplement the programs or the efforts that you have that's really at your core, like, this is what I need to be doing, but is less sustainable. And then in the lower right-hand corner, we have things that are low impact, but high efficiency. This is where a lot of fundraisers live. They don't have a lot of impact in the community. They don't have a lot of impact on your mission in like developing the long-term outcomes that you're all about. But they're efficient. They bring in the money. They bring in the resources, whatever those resources are. They bring in resources, And these are the things that, as long as you have high efficiency with, that not only should they be sustained, but they often supplement the other areas that are less sustainable. So if you think about it from a fundraising standpoint, you fundraise so that that core mission can continue to exist. That breakfast that you have is not necessarily the most impactful. There may be a little impact on the donors, on your overall marketing and messaging, but it doesn't directly impact the people that you're serving, but it makes that service possible. And so that's the story that we should be telling with all of these measurements. Again, this isn't just about your organizations. You could do this for your own life. You could do this for your schoolwork. You could do it for an exercise program that you have. You can do this for a lot of different things as long as you understand what you're measuring. So next we're going to talk about, again, pivoting. This is our year of pivot, and there are ways that you can that you need to pivot in your measurements. So one is your methods. You want to make sure that you're using valid resources and that you're consistent with your measurement methods. And when that gets out of whack, then your information becomes less reliable. So you need to constantly kind of be testing for that. The next is relevancy. Have you guys ever had a goal that was super important, super relevant in the moment, and then something happened and you're like, well, that went out the window. It's not even a point of doing it anymore. And I kind of come back to where we are in society right now. A lot of us are rethinking what really matters in our lives, what really matters for our communities, and what our world really needs. And so being able to step away from a goal that's no longer relevant and develop new measurements for new goals moving forward. Influence. So there's going to be some times when you think you have your lead measure and you test it and you work it and you're trying to make it move that metric, and it just doesn't. Don't give up. That's just not the lead measure you thought that's going to actually move that. So you just need to go back and retest and look and see what's actually going to influence the measurement that you're talking about. And then the last one is alignment. So making sure that your goals are in line with your team's goals, and that your team's goals are in line with your organization's goals. It's kind of like being part of a family. If my goal is to, I'll give you the best one, and this is a personal one from my own family. If your goal is to go on and get a higher education, but education is not the goal for you that your parents have, well, now your goals are not in alignment with their goals. And there's always going to be that conflict. And what you achieve is not going to be what the family as a whole was moving towards. So my family as a whole was moving towards, we were farmers, was moving towards a legacy of agriculture. And I wanted to go off to college, which no one in my family had ever done, and become an accountant. I mean, how ridiculous is that from my parents' point of view? But instead, I did. I achieved my own goal, but my parents didn't achieve theirs. So that balance, that conflict is constantly there when goals are not aligned. And I showed this before too, but I want to spend some time on it this time. An investment in knowledge pays the best interest. And you guys are doing that, but we want to give you another opportunity to make that kind of investment. In September of 2020, we are going to launch the Rule Your Results education platform. And this is education that is built specifically for nonprofit professionals at many levels. We even have a section for boards. And what this is meant to do is increase your knowledge of organizational effectiveness, specifically focusing, not entirely, but always having a lens on financial measures and how you can better understand those and better leverage those to make your overall organization more effective. So in this platform, we're going to have community, we're going to have education, we're going to have templates and interviews. It's going to be a great opportunity for you to make connections with people all across the US, we hope, and learn from each other, just like we're doing here. So again, if you want to get in touch with me, my email is down on the bottom of this slide, or you can give us a call. Our phone number is there. Our lovely Diane, who is on the video today, will be picking that up and talking to you and getting you the information or connection to whatever you need. And then again, we have tons of resources on our website. I've done several webinars. We have a lot of templates out there. So you can either go to rollyourresults.com or fourleafaccounting.com and get the things that you need. All right, are we ready for questions?
Yeah, I think we do have a couple of questions to kick off our Q&A. Thank you so much. That presentation was so informative. Our first question was, how would you best measure the donor response to COVID and the economy change, which was followed directly by, how would you strategize with that data?
Wow, that's a really, really great one. So let's take the first part of that. You know, your communication is kind of where it starts. So you would want to measure the efficiency or the effectiveness of the communication that you sent out about COVID. So if you sent out a message to donors that said, you know, in a response to COVID, we are doing X, Y, and Z, you can be a part of it by giving an amount. How many gifts did you get in relation to that? And so the donor response is not necessarily to the crisis at large, it is to your individual ask of them in that moment. And so from a strategy standpoint, you want to figure out what are the levers. And so some of the levers might be figuring out the motivation of your donors. Some of the levers might be the number of communications that you send out, positively or negatively. Like, I know a lot of people were flooded with COVID messages when it first happened, and we sent our own message out by video, and we actually had a client say, oh, I didn't open it. I was getting messages from anyone I'd ever done business with, and so I just didn't open them. But it was not only a message about what we're doing for COVID, but it was about what the client could do in relation to COVID. So he missed out on a big valuable message. Why did he miss out? Well, one, he was inundated, he felt, and so there was no space for him to take that message in. And two, perhaps I didn't do a well enough job delivering the message. So maybe I didn't give a great title to the email or anything that made him take action on it. So there's just some ways that you can measure and strategize around that. Again, the main point of the strategy is to know what levers you need to pull, and then you can decide how to pull them. Anyone else?
There is another question. It says, there are some situations where it's easier to identify metrics that accurately measure your impact. Can you talk about good approaches when you're not sure that the metrics you have access to are the best way to measure your impact?
Yeah, so this happens a lot in social service. You know, when we talk about impact, we typically are talking about long range goals, like long range changes and behavior changes and economic changes, or whatever the case may be. So what I would suggest that you do is back up and give yourself 3 points of measurement. Some immediate outcomes, some intermediary outcomes, and then the long range. Because the long range outcomes are typically is going to be information that you receive from other sources. So it may be Department of Labor statistics on employment. It could be CDC statistics on healthcare. Or education, Department of Education statistics on graduation rates, or whatever the case may be. But your particular role, your particular impact starts with some outcomes. And so develop some short range and intermediate range outcomes that you can ask questions about and more easily measure than the long range ones.
Yeah, just as a follow-up to that question, what would you say is a good strategy when nonprofits are in the position that we're in now, where maybe the impacts are very difficult to measure because of extenuating circumstances? Seems
Right.
like changing really quickly, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So things are changing really quickly. You just have to reform what your goal is. And so again, pivoting to make sure that what you're doing is what you should be doing in response to what's going on in your environment. So let's take the COVID thing. Part of it is people are out of work. And so if you're trying to get people employed, or if you're just trying to help people develop income sources, things are constantly changing with the SBA stuff and the unemployment stuff, or whatever the case may be. You just have to be consistent in what your goal is. The measurements might have to change depending on how your environment is changing. You just have to be intentional about it.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Great strategy. I had another question. You talked about having a scoreboard as a tool, and I know you showed us the graph. Can you show us a physical example of a scoreboard tool that has worked for you? Or do you have any suggestions for potentially online resources that might work as a scoreboard, or any tools that you've used like that?
So I'm a big Excel user, and Excel is a great kind of ubiquitous tool that you can use, that everyone can understand and have access to. And so it's great for aggregating data and then also presenting things graphically. But I really suggest that, you can do that, but also for yourself, give yourself a scoreboard. It could be a thermometer that you're coloring in. I'll tell you one thing that I can't believe I'm going to admit to this. One of the things that I had a goal of about 2 years ago was business related, and the reward I was going to give myself, because I was working alone at that time, the reward I was going to give myself was a spa day. And so I took a picture, my own photograph, put it on a copier, cut out my head, and colored in a face mask as I met certain levels of my goal. Now, it's ridiculous, but it kept me focused on the end result. So don't be afraid to be a little fun with it.
Yeah, that's awesome. What a great example. Thank you for sharing that. Does anybody else have any questions that they'd like to ask in the chat? That's all of the questions that I have so far. Okay, well, hearing none, thank you so much, Jen. I am super, super grateful for having spent this time with you. You have a lot of expertise that you shared with us today, and I really appreciate your time. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, it was an honor for us, and thank you for having us.
Great. I'll hand it back to Megan or Julie. I think we have a 15-minute break now until our next session. So we'll see you at the next one.